produce the fruit or whatever that we want from them, and then we let them die, right? In their natural habitat, they might actually be perennials. They might not, but they might be perennials. Tomatoes are a good example of that. Like in their natural habitat, tomatoes are perennials. They keep growing year after year. But here it gets cold in the wintertime, they just die off. Yeah. Okay? All right, cool. Little backup. So we talked about photosynthesis last time. I want to revisit some basic plant cellular biology. Unlike animal cells, or unlike animals, plants don't have muscle and they don't have bone, right? So they rely upon the structure of the cell itself to provide them with their support. Okay. So I'm not going to go into all the different parts of the cell. I'm just going to highlight 3 differences between plant cells and animal cells. 1, plant cells have chloroplasts. What are chloroplasts for? Photosynthesis. 2, when it comes to that structural support, plant cells have a cell wall. Yes. That's made out of cellulose. Okay? Cellulose is an amazing natural polymer. It's super strong, right? We make buildings out of it. It's also super flexible, right? It can bend back and forth, and it's relatively lightweight. The cell wall of the plant is it's like the bricks that make a house, right? So these plant cells get stacked together, you know, and that structure is what causes the plant to grow upright. There's no muscle, there's no bone, it's just all these cells stacked together. Okay? The third adaptation, or third, or say difference between plant cells and animal cells, is this thing called the central vacuole. All life needs water, plants included. Plants need water for photosynthesis. But plants can't go get water, right? Animals evolved in water, 1. 2, if an animal's thirsty, you can go seek out water. Plants can't do that. So they need the ability to store water somehow, and they store their water inside their own cells, okay? And that's in this central vacuole thing. The idea being you store water, you know, until it rains again, basically. All right, notice plant cells do have mitochondria. So whereas you are only capable of doing respiration, plants do both. Plants do photosynthesis and they do respiration. They actually are able to do both. As a matter of fact, you know, one of the main reasons they do photosynthesis is to store sugars that can then be respired later on in the mitochondria, and they can use that for growth and development. Right? Questions? No? All right. Good. Okay. All right. Do you guys remember like real basic biology? Cells are organized into tissues, and tissues are organized into organs. And organs are organized into organ systems. Did you learn this in 211 or 212? Yeah. Okay, all right. It's the same thing in plants. It works the exact same way. You have individual cells, cells working together to form tissues, tissues working together to form organs, organs working together to form organ systems. All right. So we do have tissues. It seems kind of weird, but it's the same basic concept. Okay? The 3 different tissue types we're going to talk about: ground tissue, vascular tissue, and dermal tissue. Dermal tissue, what do you think dermal tissue is? Skin. Very good. Vascular tissue, what's that for?
Water.
Right, transporting stuff. And ground tissue is the bulk, it's the meat of the plant. Okay? All right. We'll go in depth into each of these. That's just a lot of words. Okay. Cross section of a plant. Okay. Here we have on the outside the dermal tissue, the epidermis. Here on this leaf, dermal tissue. Why is it tissue? Because it's made up of a bunch of cells. It's on the outside. This is the epidermis. The epidermis excretes the cuticle, which is waxy substance on top. Epidermis also has the stomata, which we've talked about before. Right. The ground tissue makes up the bulk of the plant. This stuff it's this stuff in here. This is the ground tissue. It's we'll call the pith. It's the meat of the plant. All right? We'll talk about, it's made up of 3 different cell types: parenchyma, sclerenchyma, and parenchyma. I always told my wife if we had 3 daughters, I'd name them. She said you were getting a vasectomy. All right, and then the vascular tissue, xylem and phloem, we'll learn about these. We'll go way more into depth when we get into transport. Xylem transports water, phloem transports the sugar in the sap. Okay. Okay. Yeah, what's up?
Can we go back to the
Yeah.
So the xylem and phloem.
Phloem. Yes.
So how can we tell based on?
Based on that?
Yeah. Because I mean, the xylem looks big, but
yes.
The other ones.
That's it.
So.
There you go. You got it.
No, the phloem and the other things.
That's the xylem.
Mm-hmm.
That's the phloem.
Where?
Right there. Yeah.
I mean, from the other tissues, like from the ground tissues.
Right. How can you identify them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to know how a student in a botany class can identify it, or how a researcher can identify it? Both? Well, how do researchers initially identify these things is by their function. And so the vascular tissue carries stuff, right? So what you can do is you can put a dye, and actually Lydia Garris just did this. I want to do it for you guys. You ever done this where you take a flower and you put in a different colored dye? Okay. And what you do is the dye runs through it, then you cut it, and you're like, oh, the dye was there. So that's vascular tissue, right? The dye didn't go over there. That must be ground tissue, right? So that's the way that a researcher would do it. How do you do it? Like, how do you do it? See this model? See, these are colored here.
Okay.
That's a vascular bundle. Right? See how it's raised, and they've like outlined this and highlighted this. Okay. There are also some other characteristics of the cells that make up the vascular tissue and the ground tissue that I'm going to talk about in a little bit that are highlighted on the models, and I'll illustrate that. Yeah.
So is there more xylem?
No. Good guess. They're called sieve tubes. They're part of the phloem right there. Xylem's in here. We'll get to that. We'll get to it. You guys are jumping ahead. All right? All right. Okay. Ground tissue. This is the meat of the plant. This is like the bulk of the plant is ground tissue. Okay? There's all sorts of things. It can be used for storing water, it can be used for storing sugar, it can be used for structural support, okay? Used for photosynthesis, etc., etc., etc. The workhorse cell of the ground tissue, really the workhorse cell of the plant, is called the parenchyma. It does all sorts of stuff. As I mentioned, it's storage. It does photosynthesis. It secretes stuff. It does secretions. Okay? It's the bulk workhorse of the plant. Here's a great example. These are parenchyma cells, and here just called palisade parenchyma cells. This is a leaf. They're what do the photosynthesis in the leaf, are the parenchyma cells. These guys right here. Okay. So this is ground tissue made up of parenchyma cells. Parenchyma cells. Parenchyma cells are like I said, they do most of the work in the plant. Okay. All right. Parenchyma. Then there's parenchyma. Parenchyma cells. I don't know where these names came from. But parenchyma cells are usually used for support.
They're like collagen.
Yeah. Yep. Very good. The best example I can think of parenchyma cells are in celery. You ever eat celery and get that stuff stuck in your teeth?
Yeah.
Those are parenchyma cells. So that's tissue made out of parenchyma cells. So they're flexible, but they're structural. They have a thickened cell wall that has pectin in it. Anybody ever make jelly or jam? If you do that, you use pectin. It's a protein that causes things to stick together, coagulate. Okay. So parenchyma cells are used, they're structural, really structural. Sclerenchyma cells are really hard. Very hard. So the cells that make up the casing of a nut, like a walnut, that hard stuff, those are sclerenchyma cells. Thorns, those are sclerenchyma cells. So they're protective. They have these really thick secondary cell walls. They got a primary cell wall and then a thickened secondary cell wall that's just pumped full of proteins, and it's just really, really hard. They're used in defense. They're used in structure, other sorts of things. Another place you'll find sclerenchyma cells, you ever eat a pear and it's kind of gritty,
Yeah.
right? Those are sclerenchyma cells, and the reason we think that the pears evolved sclerenchyma cells inside of their flesh, inside their pericarp, is it acts as a laxative, right? Because remember, what's the point of a fruit? Distribute the seeds, right? So the animal eats it, and then it needs to do what to it? Poop it out, right? And so if you put Metamucil, if you're putting lots of good fiber, a laxative in that fruit, it'll help you poop it out. So that gritty stuff in there, those are sclerenchyma cells. Sclerenchyma cells are super, super hard to digest. Right? That's like you wouldn't eat the shell of a walnut. That's not edible. That's all sclerenchyma cells. Okay. Okay, so that's the ground tissue. Moving on. Vascular tissue. There are two types of vascular tissue. Xylem and phloem. Xylem is used for transporting water. And it always moves from root to shoot. Right? Water comes in through the root hairs of the plant, and it goes up the plant to the leaves and out. Water is always moving from the ground up. We'll learn about why that is. Okay. There are two cells, or two cell types, that make up xylem. Tracheids and Vessel members, or I learned vessel elements, either term is fine. Okay. These are the cells that make up the xylem. Some plants have just tracheids, some plants have tracheids and vessel members, some plants just have, well, I don't know of any plants that just have vessel members. Some plants just have tracheids, like conifers, for example, only have tracheids, they don't have vessel members. Evolutionarily, tracheids came first. They're the ancestral cell type. So here's a look at the two different ones. So here's the tracheid. Tracheids are long and thin, and they've got these pits on the side that allows water to pass through. You can tell it's a tracheid. Where is it? Here. Tracheids, because they're long and thin, they need extra support, and so they have these ridges on them, just like your what? Just like your trachea, right? Just like your trachea, right? Has extra support on it, like your trachea. So that's how you can always identify tracheids. They've got those ridges on them. Okay.
Is it just one way?
What's that?
It's just one way. I go up.
Always goes up. Yep. Water always goes from root to shoot. Okay. Vessel members, on the other hand, they're shorter and fatter. They're bigger. Vessel members can carry more water, which is good if there's a lot of water. So trees that live in places with lots of water tend to have a lot more vessel members. Maple trees, oak trees, chestnuts are broadleaf trees, have these because they carry a lot of water. They live in wet places, okay? The conifers, like the ones around us, the hemlocks, the Doug fir, the pine trees, they have tracheids because they grow in very dry environments, like the Pacific Northwest. Okay?
Northwest is dry.
Yes.
On the previous slide, it said underneath the xylem, it said dead when functional.
Yes.
What does that mean?
They're dead. There's no living thing inside of them. Yep.
So are they alive at some point?
When they're growing and then they die. So when they first grow, they grow and then they die. So thanks for pointing this out. So xylem is dead at maturity. The cell grows, it forms its cell wall, and then it dies. They're basically tubes is what they are, right? We'll see phloem, on the other hand, they're living cells that are actively working to move the fluid along. Xylem just uses the laws of physics, and it, and water passes through it. Okay? Questions? Page? Yep. Okay. Phloem. Phloem moves sugar and other things, what we refer to as sap. Okay. Plants, the main thing plants produce are sugars. They use sugars all the time, but they produce other stuff as well. You ever like move wood around, or like Christmas trees? You ever like move a tree, like help somebody move a Christmas tree or something like that, and you get the sap on you, and it's like super sticky, okay? And it has a smell to it, has an odor, that pine smell, like pine sol, or you know what I'm talking about? Murphy's oil soap has that smell to it. Okay. Those odors are produced by what are called secondary metabolites they're chemical defenses that the plant uses to guard against pathogens. We oftentimes use these for, like eucalyptus is an example of this. Tea tree oil is an example of this. Lavender, rose oil, all these are what we call secondary metabolites. They're used to protect the plant. They're often antifungal, antimicrobial. We use them for those same purposes. Tea tree oil is a great example of that, right? Tea tree is used as a disinfectant. Soap. That's what essential oils. Yeah, essential oils are any type of oil taken from a plant that we have a use for. Exactly, essential oils. Yeah, those are all secondary metabolites. Yeah. So those would be carried in the phloem. Okay. The main cell of the phloem is called a sieve tube. Sieve tube member, sieve tube. And they are called sieve tubes because, and this is what Elena was asking about before, these red dots right here, these are highlighting the ends of the sieve tube members. There's a sieve plate at the end. It's like a colander, right? Or a strainer at the very end, okay? So, if this is a sieve tube, and sieve tubes are found in phloem, what is this tissue? It's vascular tissue, good. So it's vascular tissue right here. Oops. Now, we're going to go more in depth into this when we talk about transport, but next to the sieve tube is what's called a companion cell. And the sieve tube needs the companion cell to help it pump the sap. Okay? And the thing with phloem, unlike xylem, is phloem doesn't move just from root to shoot. It can move from root to shoot, it can move from shoot to root, it can move from root to root, or shoot to shoot. We say that phloem moves the sap from source to sink. I shall demonstrate to you now a source and a sink. This faucet is a source. This sink is a source, sink. Sound good? Okay. For those of you still being supported by your parents financially, your parents are a source of cash and you are a sink. Isn't that a great example? Yeah. Okay. For those of you who have a car, you are a source of cash and your car is a sink. Okay. All right. Sieve tube members, as I mentioned before, these long tubes, they've got these sieve plates at the end. The sieve plates allow the sap to pass from one tube to the next. Next to the sieve tube is the companion cell. It's very, very hard to know which cell is the companion cell. It's super hard, okay? But we know it has to have one next to it. There has to be one there. We don't know if that is it or not, but there has to be one right there. We'll learn about that when we get into how this functions, but basically, the companion cell helps pump the sap through the sieve tube. Yep. Yeah, it's okay.
Does it produce like an enzyme or protein or like something that?
We'll get into it. I don't want to like jump the gun because yeah, spoilers. Yeah. So the issue is that the sieve tube again is mostly a tube. It's mostly just for moving the sap through the phloem. And so this cell next to it does most of the metabolic work. So yeah, it does most of the metabolism that helps that process occur. And we'll talk about how it does that. But yeah, basically it uses active transport, right? It produces ATP and uses active transport to pump sugars against a gradient. Yeah. So.
Does that move year round?
No. Right? Because it's an active process that requires ATP, it requires energy, it's dependent upon the weather. So this time of year, the sap is flowing, right? Because plants are growing. So what trees do, a lot of trees do, is during the summertime, they're growing, they're growing, they're growing. They take all that sugar that they're producing in their leaves and they pump it down into their roots. And they grow the roots and they store the sugar in the roots. There are parenchyma cells down there, they're storing all that sugar. Wintertime, they go dormant. They go dormant. This time of year, they start to grow again. Well, how can they grow without photosynthesis? They use the sugar that's been stored in the roots to start growing again. Okay? That sugar has to get from the root back up to the leaf buds for those leaf buds to start growing. The phloem is what does that. This is why this time of year, do not park your car underneath a tree. Because often during the wintertime, while the tree was dormant, during a large storm, an ice storm, snowstorm, that sort of thing, one of the branches may have broken. And so that sap starts flowing. It just starts flowing up towards those leaves, those branches. If there's a break in one of those branches, it just flows right out the end of it. Now the sap is kind of like our blood. It will coagulate at the end, right? And it'll seal that cut, but not before it drips sap all over your car, right? Cool. All right, let's take our break. Come back at 12 o'clock.